I want to invite my new best friend, Geoff Luck, out to the stage. He's the film's creator. He's an Emmy Award nominated executive producer and director of Impact for the Wild Hope Initiative at HHMI Tangled Bank Studios. So Geoff, come on out. Geoff, it is such a pretty film. I mean, just let's talk about the aesthetics first. It's so beautifully done, but it also has this great, really inspiring message. And I'm wondering what inspired you to create it.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for having us. And this is one of the first times we've been able to share the film with an audience, so it's a real thrill to actually hear people reacting to it. So thank you all for being here. This is one of 8 stories that HHMA Tangle Bank Studios, which is an arm of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a philanthropy based in D.C., is doing to look at conservation success stories around the world. So they got me on board as a showrunner with my colleague Whitney Bierker, and we basically found a number of stories that could help sort of show that there are solutions to particularly the biodiversity crisis that are local and that are being spearheaded by all sorts of people, just to give hope, to show that this thing can be turned around and that we can make a difference. And so this particular story, we were familiar with Gorangosa National Park and some of the really powerful initiatives that are being done there. They have been pioneering for well over a decade now, sort of what has become a much more tradition or a promising approach in conservation, which is really to focus on the communities of the people who live there rather than excluding the people. You stay outside the park. This is for the animals. That's for the people.
Right.
It's all about community engagement, and this program was one we knew of that we thought was pretty extraordinary, because it was a way of looking at how do you safeguard this vital watershed, right? This ecological asset of the mountain and on the top and the forest there. That's necessary for all the wildlife and all of the hundreds of thousands of people who live there.
Sure.
And so it was really, well, let's tell that story. And what's really interesting and what's really fun and exciting to be sharing it here in this forum is we found with this story and with several of of the first 8, we're about to do another 24 as we finish this first season, that, so many are adjacent to or involved with agronomy, aquaculture, different ways, because it takes so much of the way in which we carry ourselves on the planet and interact with the ecosystems around us.
So if you watch this and you're sort of just, watching it like, we do most television shows, you might think that it's a show about coffee. But it's actually, from what you've told me, a show about water.
It is. I mean, it's there's a way where, it's ultimately about, we did it for the conservation story, but that watershed issue is so critical and so important. And how do we manage our water systems? And particularly freshwater systems, which are under such duress globally, right? We see that through, and a number of the speakers today have been talking about sort of the agricultural complex, the phosphates and the nitrates in the water, all of these kinds of things. So here we see in this, in this microcosm, in this one particular locale, a way of interacting with the ecosystem in a way that's mutually beneficial, right? It's beneficial to the people who are doing it. They're able to grow these crops for greater value, that they're able to then restore the forest by putting all of these native trees. That's good for the biodiversity on top of the mountain. But then the water, that thing is a water tower and a sponge, as I think Pedro says so beautifully. And it just, all dry season long, it just supplies the water to everything that lives downhill. And it's critical. So thinking through, how do we think of these systems as cohesive and coherent and manage the way we interact with them? Because, and I hope it comes clear in the story that the people who've been deforesting the mountain are doing so out of, dire necessity.
Desperation.
It's desperation. Yeah. They're having to survive. So it's really also exciting to see a park management system, run by the Mozambican government, saying, okay, let's solve this for them. And they've been doing other things with, educational programs and girls' initiatives and all sorts of things in other aspects in the way they interact with the local community.
Sure. And Geoff, that seems so common sense, but that's a huge diversion from what, as you said before, from how conservation efforts used to be sort of played out by governments, by conservation agencies, by nonprofit groups that, really sort of pitted farmers and communities against wildlife. And as you said, there's a lot of desperation. People live in the forest. They live on the mountain. They live there. This is their culture. And so documenting that must be so interesting because these are people who've known the former way of conservation, sort of how it's worked in the past, where they were sort of excluded from it, but now they're really part of it.
I mean, I think it's critical, right? And it's global, and we see a lot of movement, I think, in conservation globally. Particularly, you're seeing a lot at UN and at COP. For those of you who were following that, and the focus on indigenous peoples and their custodianship and how important that is, and how to support that, and how to recognize and give it, the support and validation that it needs and deserves. So but it's like anything else. There's so many places where, it's a listening exercise.
Sure.
And similarly, as we go in to make these films, I mean, this was field produced by a local Mozambican filmmaker, for us and with us. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to make sure that those voices are authentic, that they're coming from and of and in the communities. We want everyone speaking whatever language they speak.
Sure.
We want to make sure that they're able to express themselves directly, because a lot of these initiatives are not being driven by the top down. They're being driven from communities, from people on the ground who have ideas, who see opportunity, and start them going. And that's many of the other stories, similarly, that we've been looking at, look at analogous situations.
Yeah, no, that's one thing I found so sort of creative and impactful about this kind of storytelling, that you're using the folks who are living the story, that they are an essential part of it. You're not just telling it for them. That's another huge sort of diversion in filmmaking.
Well, I mean, it's long overdue. I mean, other people have been doing it, but I mean, I worked at National Geographic for a long, long time, and there wasn't a lot of that there. And so there's a way where I think what we need to do is to make sure that these stories are being told by the people, to your point, whose story it is.
Yeah.
Right? And ultimately, and part of the reason we wanted to, and Tangle Bank wants to focus on stories of hope, is because we know, scientifically speaking, right, it's a scientific institution, that people take action when they see there can be result and impact. If you think it is hopeless, if it's all doom and gloom, most people will check out and they will not get engaged. So it's really important to tell stories. We also know through science that the way to change behavior most effectively is through narrative storytelling. So so let's tell some stories about the kinds of ways we can make change, and then and get them out to as broad and wide an audience. So we've made sure that there's no fiscal impediment to getting access to any of these things. They're going to be on PBS, but then they'll be streaming on YouTube through the Nature. They'll be on their own Instagram feed. Anyone can watch these things, globally. And that's the whole idea, is that they could be shared.
Sure. I want to go back to the people involved making the stories with you, telling these stories.
Sure.
You're providing a lot of local training. There's capacity building happening that I don't think happens with other films all the time, because you want to go back to these folks in the future and have them be the storytellers again themselves. That takes a lot of work. That's a really long-term investment, and takes a lot of money, I imagine.
Yeah, no, I mean, it takes a way of thinking differently, and we're just getting started. I think it's going to take us some time to get it figured.
Sure.
It's something I've done in some of the other projects before I was on this project. And, like in this one, Ago, who is our field producer, he's been there working with the park for years as a cameraman. I was there on another project, and he worked as an assistant camera. And then it's like, you're ready to field produce. So we brought people in who were local, as many as we could. We are doing training. We are going, and we've teamed up with NUF, which is an organization based in South Africa, as well as the park. And there's actually going to be held in the park I think it's a 3-week workshop for 12 African filmmakers to come and do science storytelling, profiling 12 scientists who are also working in the park. And then they'll also come back for another, I think 3 weeks, maybe 6 months later. So I'll be mentoring them. So we're trying to find different ways, either by hiring local members to amplify a team, to completely farm pieces out to the local filmmaking communities, and then also to do capacity building, so we're not extractive in the way we're making the films as well, and zero carbon it out and do all that kind of stuff.
It's really exciting. It's a really different way of looking at things, and I love that part of it. For an audience like this one that's made up of, a very diverse audience, people who decided to come out on a Sunday when it's a really nice day and still care about our food and agriculture systems, I wonder what you want them to take away from the film. Like when they go back tonight and have dinner with their families, or they're in the office on Monday, what message do you hope they're sharing?
I mean, I think for me, the biggest lesson I'm taking away from the research and from all of these stories is that this positive change is possible. And we can make these differences, that we are finding solutions, and that we can do this. I think the biggest thing, in some ways, if I frame it in terms of the overall impetus behind Wild Hope as an initiative, is just that we're confronting these dual global crises, right? The climate crisis, which we're very aware of, and and then the biodiversity crisis, which gets a lot less play. It hasn't been picked up by the media. It hasn't sort of been paid attention to as much. It is equally dire and significant, right? Like we're pulling the pieces out of the Jenga pile, and we don't know what we're pulling out, and we don't know which ones are going to make the thing collapse. And that's happening at a dramatic and a very unsettling way. One of the things that I think is so powerful and important and inspiring, and just getting to know the people who are making these changes, not just here in Mozambique, but all the places we've been telling the story, from New York Harbor to Mexico City to wherever we've been filming these, is the fact that biodiversity loss is not it has global implications, but it is typically a local problem that can have local solutions, so that you can actually make huge impacts to biodiversity loss at a local level. That one forest, your backyard, we can make, so there's a way where, as we think about the biodiversity crisis on the global scale, because its implications are global, the way of affecting it can actually be intensely local. And that gives us power. That gives us opportunity. And that's why highlighting stories where people, some of them scientists, some of them working for parks, most of them lay people, are just making it happen wherever they are. And that would be that would be the big takeaway for me.
Sure. And you mentioned, sort of the dual crises. I also see another crisis, involved. You have the biodiversity loss crisis. You have the climate crisis, but you also have this public health crisis.
Absolutely.
And what's happening in this community is that farmers are actually making more money by doing, by farming responsibly, by farming in sustainable ways, by using natural resources creatively but sustainably. That makes a huge difference. That's like intergenerational. That kind of farming will last for a long time. And so I think that health part of this is really, really important.
No, I love that you're pointing that out. I mean, we're seeing it. The Mexico City story I just mentioned. We filmed about the way they're trying to bring back the axolotls, these aquatic salamanders. There are like 1 million of them in captivity because people love them as pets. They're almost extinct in the wild. The only place they live is in this place, these lakes in Mexico City that are basically the last thing left from the Aztec and the Mexica people before them, the way they lived there. By going to the local chinamperos, the farmers who are doing this traditionally, many of them doing regenerative agriculture that lets them restore the axolotls to the place. But it is better, to your point, for them economically by having these non-monoculture crops, organic. They're not having the same kinds of health issues because of the pesticides and other things that we're getting into the water, and then they're drinking. So it's been this really kind of this coherent way of focusing on the welfare of the people, and then it makes the welfare of the whole ecosystem that much better. I mean, we're all part of it, right? It's all one thing. So by thinking of it that way, that's really what these folks are showing. And then what we just do is we just come in and just say, here's a mic.
Right.
Tell us what you're figuring out.
Well, and the fact that it makes economic sense, that's what's going to change policy. And I know you're a storyteller and don't probably consider yourself an activist or an advocate, but these are very activist stories that are being portrayed that can change people's minds, very powerful people's minds, business leaders' minds who are in the audience. And I think that's critical to this, getting those people who normally wouldn't be watching a conservation story and thinking it relates to them.
That's a huge compliment. I mean, and I think that, we've heard it a number of times this morning, right? That there can be these economic benefits to being a good steward, to being a good participator, right?
Sure.
And, we wanted to bring some of the coffee here. You used to be able to get that coffee here in the
Right,
United States.
right.
It's no longer being shipped to the United States because there's grown to be such a big market for it in Mozambique and Southern Africa. They're giving, like, they have a relationship with Nando's.
Sure.
Nando's is using it for their coffee in South Africa and in the UK. So it is becoming a viable way of them creating a sustainable, economy for the people who are living in an intensely rural area.
Sure.
And
sure.
as you can see with some of them talking about the very real impact it has on their daily livelihoods. Their children are now getting education. All the way in which and the park, they keep putting in more animals. They just put in African wild dogs and leopards over the past year. The park is coming back in this incredibly resurgent way, the wildlife itself. So
Sure.
everything is benefiting from this cohesive approach.
And there are all these other sort of projects going on. We saw the beekeeping.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about gender roles and how they might be changing in this community, how women might have more of a voice.
Oh, it's changing the way that the people of those communities are choosing to make it change. The beekeeping is also integrated with conflict mitigation. So a lot of the times they're using beekeeping. They're putting the beehives along fences, basically connected by ropes. So as the elephants try to come in, they figure out where the elephants come into the communities where they have conflict potentially and coming in to raid crops. They put the bee fences in a row because elephants are afraid of bees. That's the one thing they're totally terrified of. So when they hit which is funny because I guess they fly up their noses and sting them or in their ears. So you have these giant creatures terrified of bees. And so they push on the rope. The rope shakes the beehive, the bees come out, and the elephants bugger off and leave the crops alone. So that's better. They're doing, another film I did years ago about an elephant scientist. So she's doing a program for girls in the school, and she's showing role models that work in the park, all of the women who work in the park, not just like as a scientist like she does, someone who's working in the kitchen. This one's a tour guide. This is, and these are roles. You stay in school. Don't get married when you're 13. And so and those are having powerful, huge impacts. But again, it's conservation putting people first, keeping people in the picture rather than acting as if they're the problem, right?
Finally.
They live here.
Finally, it's a huge shift in how conservation, and as you said before, many UN institutions are now taking this viewpoint, but it's taken decades to get there.
Surprisingly, it has. But I think, and Goran Gosa has done an incredible job kind of pioneering that and bringing that to international attention. African parks, there are a number of places that are employing these kinds of strategies and showing that it works. And that's ultimately what you need, right? You need some pilot programs that make everyone go, oh, yeah. And that works. And that's sort of what we're trying to do with the series is to say, hey, here are some examples of ideas that work, that are shown to work. Take a look. And then, so the idea is, well, maybe it doesn't apply directly, but how could you, do you think differently about the watershed where you live? Mm-hmm. Do you think differently about forestation or what different ways you might approach growing crops in a way that's sustainable or that's able to be integrated with the wildlife that already is or could be there if you reintroduce it. So I think those are the kinds of opportunities we have.
Sure. And as talking about opportunities, what opportunity does an audience like this one have to get involved in the Wild Hope Initiative? Because it is this initiative that needs support. I imagine it needs funding.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's fortunately we were being, HHMI is a philanthropy, so it is making this happen. What I would say is to spread the word. This series is coming out on PBS over the summer. It's then going to be streamed on the PBS Nature, if you know that program, their YouTube channel. So all these episodes will be going there. We're now the 24 I'm talking about are all now shorter pieces. These are all half hours. We're going and shifting over to do more 3 to 5 minute, 10 to 15 minute pieces, 90-second, 30-second, 10-second things for social. Those will all be coming out on Instagram, on Wild Hope TV, and then our website wildhope.tv. So that just go there, watch that space, and really what we want is for people to be able to access and watch this and share these, and which is why we've made sure there's no paywall to any of them.
Thank you for that. In the minute or so that we have left, I'm really interested, we've been talking a lot about how the series is people-focused. From you, as the person sitting next to me, what drove you to do this?
I think it's a a long-standing connection with the natural world, and like my filmmaking trajectory kind of took me into conservation and science-related storytelling in a way that kind of felt like, oh yeah, that kid who grew up on Jacques Cousteau and just wanted to wear a red cap and be that guy, gets to be out here and tell these stories. The other side, though, is that human part. I mean, that a lot of the I've done my share or participated in sort of what would be called the traditional blue chip natural history films, the Attenborough-style films. I love those, but they leave humans out of the picture. And I advocated for many years when I was at National Geographic, like, one of the most interesting moments that ever happened for me, I was editing a film about a cinematographer who was making a film about lions, an IMAX film, and he started yelling at somebody, and the camera bobbled, and it went over, and it showed 3 tour buses on the other side of the water hole where he was filming the lions. And all the filming had been done to make him look like he was this heroic, khaki-clad dude out there in the middle of nowhere braving the lions. And it's like, there are tour buses there. That's interesting, amazing, and terrifying. Right? What is that story? And so put the people in the picture. Let's not act like like we're not there. And you see increasingly what's really fun is, over the last 5 years or so in a lot of those blue chip films, you see, human planet, like we're looking at we're looking at urban wildlife. We're looking at the fact that every place is an ecosystem. Your house is an ecosystem. There's stuff there, and so, I think it's really that focusing on the human, and then you meet people like some of the folks shown here. The character of those people, they're inspiring people.
Absolutely.
And then then it's just, the first rule of filmmaking, just stay out of the way.
Right.
Just let them come through and talk to whoever wants to watch and listen. So thank you all for doing that.
And thank you for putting it together. It was incredible. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Geoff Luck, everyone. And please watch for the series on PBS. Thank you, Geoff.